Taoiseach, Taoiseach, there are three things that I would like to draw your attention to and the attention of the House. The first is the amount of money at stake. The second is the amount of that we as a nation need back in order to set us up for recovery. And the third is something which is a concern of mine, which is the danger of limited success. So let me start with the amount of money at stake. We're all talking about the 64 billion. We know that that's just over 30 billion for the promissory notes and 33.5 billion for the rest in terms of capitalisation. That's 64. There is a third amount, which is 17 billion on interest on the promissory notes. Now, the logic we've heard is we don't really have to count that because we're paying it into IBRC, which we own. However, I have tried to get reassurance from the Minister as to certainty that that money will be left in the account when IBRC's liabilities are discharged. Now, what I've heard back is we can't calculate that. So it is possible that the 64 billion I think we're all agreed on, there is possibly an additional 18 billion in interest. It is possible that when IBRC's liabilities are fully discharged, that money won't be there. That would bring the total cost of the bank recapitalisation to over 80 billion euros. So I would just like to draw your attention to that. It may end up being a lot more than the 64 billion. The second is, how much do we need back? Obviously, we would all like the full 64 or 80 billion back, and I appreciate that you're doing what you can to get as much of that for the country back as possible. The figures here again suggest we need it all back. Our debt to GDP ratio, as you know, next year will be 120%. Much more worryingly, our debt to GNP, which is a more suitable ratio for Ireland for the reasons we know in terms of a lot of multinational corporations, our debt to GNP will be 150%. Now, the literature says that sustainable, or unsustainable rather, kicks in somewhere between 80 and 120%. Depends on a range of factors. We are a modern, sophisticated economy, suggesting our tolerance for debt is higher than, say, a transition economy. However, when you factor in our household and corporate debt, we are now, according to one or two reports, the most indebted nation on earth. Our tolerance for higher national debt arguably is a lot lower. If we go as optimistic as possible and say the target would be a debt to GNP ratio of 80%, that would require a reduction in the debt of 95 billion. Now, obviously, we're not going to get that. I would never expect you to be able to get that. But it really does size the amount that we need to reduce our national debt by to get back to sustainability. Thank you, Chair. If we look at just debt to GDP and say, look, an 80% debt to GDP ratio is just about doable, that would require pretty much the full 64 billion. Which brings me to the danger of limited success. I passionately wish you the best of luck and support. I don't always agree with your approach, but I absolutely hope that the approach that you are taking is the most successful one for the country. My concern on limited success is the following. Let's say you manage to get 20 billion back through the promissory notes, through the ESM, through whatever mechanism. There is a danger that we will get just enough so that we can just about continue to service the debt, but at the cost of stagnation. And the analogy for me is this. It's a family renegotiating their mortgage with the bank. We know what the banks are doing right now. They're saying they're restructuring. They're moving them on to interest only. They're maybe looking at smaller capital repayments. But actually what the banks are really doing is they're extracting every last penny they can get from the borrowers. They're not trying to put them on a sustainable path. So I would just like to point you to this. It may sound slightly counterintuitive, but we may be better off getting nothing and being forced into a unilateral action where we have to impose a right down to a sustainable level, rather than getting just enough that it keeps us ticking along on the interest, but ultimately we are stagnant. Taoiseach, Taoiseach, I wish you luck. I welcome the comments of Ministers Hayes and Minister Quinn, and I hope it is the beginning of a robust approach from the government. Thank you.